Hello. Let's start a new series of videos, I don't know how many, on education. What is education? Well, it comes from educare, the Latin, meaning to lead forth, to draw forth. So, education is a bit like midwifery or facilitation, if we go by the name. Why does it say midwifery? Well, the midwife helps the woman to birth the child. The facilitator acts like a midwife in terms of birthing new understandings. It's not so much about telling you where it's at, it's about evoking the recognition in you of what you'd always sort of known but hadn't quite identified or put a name on. Now, this is not all that education is, but with that gambit, I'm sure that Socrates and Plato would be in agreement. There was a famous Platonic dialogue, Meno, the Meno, in which Socrates is talking to a slave boy on the beach, and this boy is completely untutored, unlettered, and by means of drawing figures on the sand and asking the right questions, Socrates demonstrates that this slave boy implicitly understood geometry, like Pythagoras' theorem. He couldn't have learnt it. It didn't come from experience. It was there, and it was evoked, it was called forth by the educator. Hey, see what you already knew? Now you have a name for it. Isn't it amazing that we know these things? Again, I'm not making the point of some pure idealists or rationalists, let's say, and distinguish them from empiricists, because a lot of people in the West, their starting point is the empiricism of philosophers like John Locke, who says we are born tabula rasa, blank slate, and then experience writes on this slate, and we can't know anything that we haven't experienced from the outside world. The Platonic dialogue of the Meno doesn't make sense to that mindset. How could a slave boy know about something that he hadn't been taught in a school? How can you know about something that you haven't been taught in a school?
There's been a lot of talk about schools lately.
Yeah, they have.
Yeah. And their functionality.
Feel free to bring it in. So that's the empirical school, and the rationalist school says we've got it all inside of ourselves. We are born with innate knowledge, innate ideas. And these innate ideas may be likened to hidden fractures within a block of marble. And as we start chiseling, as life works its effects on us, marble falls away along the fracture lines, and there's a great statue like Michelangelo's David revealed, the body of knowledge. There can be some truth in both schools. I'm not wedding myself to one or the other at this point. I'm just saying that let's be open to the idea of innate knowledge.
There is a benefit in classical education, but it's not to paraphrase. That's not true learning.
Right.
I don't believe anyway.
I mean, the empiricists would point to schooling and so on, and that's fine because we learn things from schools and institutions and so on, but we also have an inherent knowing.
It's got to mean something to you to really know it,
Mm-hmm.
to really understand it, and to be properly educated.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And to be able to apply it the right way.
And we've come at this before. We've talked about esoteric and exoteric knowledge. We've talked about wisdom and understanding already, and knowledge being the marriage of them. Well, knowledge is apropos, isn't it? We're talking about education. Surely education is the acquisition of knowledge.
I think you need both, personally.
Well, you do need both. If knowledge is indeed the marriage of wisdom and understanding, you need that inner knowing, which the rationalist school describes. We have these innate ideas. We know intuitively.
Knowing and fetching it out for yourself,
Mhm.
type of thing. To the classical education.
And then we also get schooled in things from outside. But here's the thing, if we don't have both of these operating at once, then we can just get top heavy with stuff that's being taught to us in institutions, school and university or college, and we don't know what these concepts really mean or how they're to be applied.
Exactly.
You know? It's just blah, blah, blah. It's just head stuff. On the other hand, we can have a lot of intuitive inklings and a sense about things. But we really need to identify the words that have been traditionally used to describe those things. We need to acquire some understanding and some engagement with the culture, with cultural tradition. That's definitely part of education. And sometimes you go to college and you learn the words that describe what you already knew from your life experience.
That's right.
Mm-hmm. If you go to college first, you nevertheless have ahead of you the need to develop the inner wisdom to know what your college education has taught you.
Otherwise you sound like an empty drum.
So I'm appealing to logic and intuition, and I'll come back to what you call the classical education in a minute. When we get to rhetoric, we'll realise that the three appeals of classical rhetoric are to logos, pathos and ethos. These are Aristotle's terms, Greek terms. Ethos is when we appeal to credibility and authority. I'm not doing that. I haven't come to you saying I'm a professor of such and such from Harvard or Yale or Oxford or whatever. I'm just a dude in front of a video cam. I'm making no appeal to ethos. I'm not saying that I've got all this scholarship behind me and this can be backed up by the research that has been done at this prestigious institution or that. It's not my gig to quote names and authorities or whatnot. You can look them up if you want. They'll probably agree with me. Hopefully they will. Now, that's ethos. So I'm taking ethos off the table basically here. You're listening to a dude in front of a video cam. I'm taking pathos off the table too, because what's pathos? Pathos is the appeal to emotion. oh, it's so terrible what happened over here or what happened over there, therefore be on my side because I'm emotionally outraged or I'm emotionally moved about something. I'm not really here to get you excited, pep talked up, and motivated and desirous of the luxuries of life, or to make of yourself some god on a trajectory of hedonism, nor am I here to depress you and scare the crap out of you and make you hate with a vengeance people out there, whether they're the politicians or other authorities or whatnot. I endeavour not to make the appeal to pathos, feeling, emotion, and not to make the appeal to ethos, authority, credentials, certification. So I'm taking ethos and pathos off the table. Why should you listen to me? Well, there's one thing left on the table, and that's logos. And I'm making an appeal through logos. What is logos? Logos is reason. Logos is logic. Logos is the meaning and the order of things. I'm not trying to excite your emotions. I'm trying to engage your mind. Ask yourself, is what I'm saying logical to you? Now, is logic the only thing I'm engaging? I'm engaging your logic and your intuition, because we are ranging over a broad terrain. And some of the things I say may be logically coherent and they may agree with things that you've logically worked out or others have logically set out. But you may feel satisfied in that area, but what about all the other stuff? Now, logic is the art of non-contradictory identification. As Aristotle said, A is not A. A thing must be either A or not A. So something can't be both a leaf and a pig at the same time and in the same respect. I can go to a hen house and see some eggs in there and say, oh, that's my next omelette. Is it an egg or is it an omelette? Well, it doesn't violate the law of contradiction because it's not at the same time and in the same respect. It's an egg now, later it can be an omelette on my plate. But I think we know what a contradiction is. If somebody is saying, I'm pro-life, I protect life, I protect babies in the womb, I'm against abortion, but they're all for bombing Gazan babies or killing babies in war or whatever, there's a contradiction, isn't there? So this is a breach of logic. If you're protective of life, you need to be protective of life in all circumstances. And,
Full stop, end of story.
Yes. On the other hand, and we talked about this a bit in the sex video where we talked about the left and the right. A lot of the students, God bless them, they are raising awareness around the world, and I don't want to stand in the way of the student protests. I think they have a right to express themselves, but a lot of them are left-wingers and they want to protect babies in some part of the world, protect life, but they don't think they don't care particularly much to protect life in the womb. So you can see that there could be a contradiction there as well. Maybe what needs to be found is a thoroughgoing way of protecting life in all circumstances. But that's a digression. What were we talking about again? We were talking about logic, yes, and intuition. I appeal to your logic and your intuition because lots of people use logic, and within a given delimited framework, it sounds logical. If you listen to the argument for this, it sounds logical, or for that, it sounds logical. But is there agreement between this and that? Do they contradict each other? So we need the logic, but we need the intuition which senses the thought system that coordinates all bits of logos, all reasons and rationales. Does it form a coherent thought system? So you're not only assessing my logic, my reasoning, I'm appealing to your reason. You are at the same time intuiting the whole thought system from which the bits and pieces that I speak come from. And you have to weigh that up against all competing thought systems. Because there might be a fragment of logic which you've heard somewhere else, from some other mouth, in some other context, pushing some other agenda. Well, that's fine. It could reinforce the logical truth of what's being said. But what is the overall thought system, the worldview, that the other logical argument has been made from? So when we look at logos, we're looking at conventional logic of the items of knowledge, but we're looking at the logos of the whole system. And I'm asking you to discern whether there's logos and systemic integrity and coherence in what you hear. Whenever you tune into whichever commentator, I have great faith in you. I have great trust in you. I'm here to serve Logos as it manifests in you. I'll bank on that. I'll leave aside pathos and ethos for other situations and people. And I'll rely on Logos to reach you. And we've had some views, but no formal comments so far, and that's all right. It's still early days. So, let's get back to Belinda's remark about a classical education. We hear that a bit too. The classical education is the liberal arts. It goes back to the classical world of ancient Greece and Rome, and it's also present in the Middle Ages, but it's not so well known in modern times, although it's undergoing a revival now. There may be schools and colleges in your part of the world which are promoting a classical education, an education in the classics, whatever that means. We hear...
It's a discipline of some sort.
Of some sort. What do you think a classical education is?
It's a discipline. It gives you an outline and a structure in which to explain your knowledge in.
Right. Are we interested in a classical education?
I think it's important, because the classical
or a popularised
education,
version of it.
yeah, it allows you to communicate to more people.
Yes.
Yeah.
What we're doing here is no substitute for a classical education for those who are interested, but it
certain kind of person.
Yeah. People go into things in greater depth according to their needs and aptitudes, but we can certainly establish the purpose of it and maybe whet the appetite for more of it. Because when we say classical, that we're referring to the classical world. When I was growing up, we had to learn some of the classics. And in one sense, this meant classical Greek and Latin, the languages of the ancient world. And they couldn't be learned everywhere. There were some grammar schools. Well, grammar is one of the 7 liberal arts too, that taught them, and you could. There were institutions of learning, and some universities taught them. Once you had some Greek and Latin, you could read some of the classical literature and appreciate some of the classical culture better. That's one meaning. Another meaning is a classical education is studying the classics. And what are the classics? Well, the classics should really be, I'm cutting to the chase, those timeless works of art.
I was about to say dateless.
Dateless, timeless, right? Timeless, that we need to preserve and keep teaching and keep learning. Because these timeless works of art have formed our civilization. Is Shakespeare a classic? Yes. Is Homer a classic? Yes. Is Raphael a classic? Yes. So there are young people today in our neck of the woods that have been offered berths in a new course due to an endowment by somebody who opened up a lot of medical centres. And this new course is called a Bachelor in Western Civilization. And it's one of many courses you can see around the place which attempt to teach the classics, not in the sense of the ancient Greek language and the Latin language, which was the language of the ancient Romans, of course, but in the sense of those timeless classics, those works of class that have built Western civilization. And Western civilization is something, presumably, evidently, really, that is worth preserving. But we don't really know what Western civilization is, do we? That's why we're talking about education. Now, is this being too West-centric, Eurocentric? Maybe it is. Now, there are great civilizations. There's the Chinese civilization, and there's Arabic civilization, and all sorts of non-Western civilizations. You might say Islamic civilization is a non-Western civilization. And they have their classics too. They're timeless masterpieces which teach them what their culture is about. In the last video, we talked about cultural diversity. We talked about avoiding the monocultures of the mind. So we need to be, I think, favourable towards and encouraging of the teaching of classics for all civilizations. If we're talking about Chinese civilization, they will have their classics like Confucius and Lao Tzu and so on, Sun Tzu. And if we're talking about Iran, they will have their classics too, especially in the poetic field. Omar al-Khayyam and Rumi, and a lot of their classics are, as I say, in the realm of poetry. The English have their classics, and the French and the Germans, so there are national classics. But I think one can make a good case that there are classics that uphold Western civilization. What do I mean by Western civilization? What are we protecting here? Is it worth protecting? Is it just some sort of patriarchal mania gone wild? Of empire builders that have just oppressed indigenous cultures around the world? No, we don't like that. That's not what we mean. Do we mean pornography and bad banking practices? Is that Western civilization? Are these the Western values that we're trying to protect? Do we mean rampant consumerism, where people don't eat well and they're into fast food, fast living and a throwaway society, and they don't care about things? Is that we in the West, we can use the word West any way we please, but are these the Western values that we are trying to defend? No, I don't think so. Are they values or are they disvalues? Are they the absence of value? Are they the absence of tradition? Are they the absence of morality? Are they the absence of good economics? A value is always a positive. It's not an absence or a negation of something. All of the nihilistic art, and some of it is quite disgusting depending on your opinion, is that the Western civilization that we are defending? Why am I even talking about Western civilization? Well, only because I'm coming to you from a Western civilization, a country that considers itself part of the heritage of Western civilization. And I'm speaking to you in English, which has now become the lingua franca, no pun intended. So, depending upon what your Western civilization notion is and your Western values, you will select your classics accordingly that teach the values of that civilization. Is Shakespeare some dead white male who had a lot of prejudices, or is he still worth studying for his insights, for the magnificent language that he helped to create? What about Dante? That's important. It's important to know what it is that we are protecting. And when we say classical education, there's the classics, and that used to be part and parcel of a classic education, the ancient languages. But there is also the classics, as in the timeless works of literature and art and architecture and so on, the cultural artifacts that have gone to make up our civilization. And today we mainly mean the latter. Now, there's another term that's bandied around, a liberal education. A liberal education. And what does liberal mean? Well, there's a political party in this country named after Liberal, but that's not what it means. Here, the Liberal Party are meant to be the Conservatives, although they're not very conservative. In the USA, the Liberals are the Progressives. So we need to define our terms. Liberal literally means free. It's like liberty. So what is the education that befits a free man or woman? It has something to do with freedom, leisure. I suppose if you're a slave or an indentured labourer and you don't have any free time, you're not going to acquire a liberal education. So there's a sense of freedom. Well, there's a promotion of freedom by a liberal education, true freedom. It helps to free the mind, and it helps one to build a society in which the value of freedom is enshrined. Freedom becomes foundational to that society. And we haven't ignored freedom, because when we were talking about rights and duties, we mentioned freedom. And we mentioned the foundation of freedom in religious freedom as well. So next time we will talk at greater length about liberal education and Septem Liberales Artes, the 7 liberal arts of the classical world, and what they have to offer us today. See you next time.